What if an ordinary joke from a friend could change your life forever? Can a friendship survive when one of the boys dares to be honest with himself and the other does not? This is a story about choosing between fear and truth, between the expectations of others and genuine feelings. The apartment was never anything special. 2 bedrooms, a living room that barely fit a couch, a kitchen table with legs that wobbled when you leaned on it. But to us, it was enough. Alex was the one who noticed the light first, how it cut through the blinds in the morning and spilled across the table like some painter's stroke. He said it reminded him of the drafting studios he'd loved since high school, the kind of place where he could lose himself in sketches and forget the noise outside. I remember him standing there the first day, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes scanning the corners as if the place was more than walls and rent. Jake didn't care about any of that. For him, the place was cheap, close to the basketball court, and most importantly, it was somewhere his parents wouldn't nag him about being responsible. Sharing rent, they said, was smarter than wasting their support money on a solo apartment. He agreed, and that was how the two of them, so different yet somehow compatible, ended up shaking hands in that tiny living room. One steady grip, calm and deliberate. The other broad, careless, almost impatient. They didn't know it yet, but the rhythm of living together would become its own language. Alex was neat to a fault. His sketchbooks stacked in perfect columns, pencils sharpened to surgical points, shoes lined under the bench at the entryway like soldiers waiting for orders. He washed his dishes the same night he used them, towel folded over the oven handle like he lived in a catalog. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was discipline. A kind of order he had learned to cling to when the world outside made no sense. Jake was the opposite. His presence spilled across every surface. Sneakers scattered in the hallway, duffel bag half-zipped with gear threatening to spill out, sweat-stained shirts tossed over the couch like forgotten flags after a battle. He laughed loudly, the kind of laugh that filled a room whether you wanted it to or not. He carried the smell of locker rooms into the apartment. Sweat, cologne, fast food. But he wasn't selfish. When practice ran late, he brought takeout for both of them without being asked. When Alex stayed up sketching until dawn, lamp glowing like a lighthouse in the corner, Jake never complained about the scratching of pencils or the rustle of paper. He'd dribble a ball against his palm absent-mindedly, the sound becoming part of their background noise. It didn't take long for them to settle into each other's routines. Opposites, yes, but somehow the contrast made the place feel alive. Alex's silence absorbed Jake's noise. Jake's energy broke through Alex's solitude. The small apartment was both too cramped and strangely comfortable, depending on the day. Then came that Friday night. The living room was crowded with Jake's teammates, pizza boxes stacked high, soda cans rolling on the floor, controllers passed from hand to hand. The air was thick with sweat and laughter, boys yelling at the screen, while digital players crashed into each other. Alex hovered at the edges, half amused, half irritated at the chaos. But he didn't say anything. He rinsed empty bottles, cleared plates, moved around the kitchen with his quiet focus. It wasn't his scene, but he let Jake have it. Eventually, the noise thinned. Teammates drifted out, yawning, shoving each other, their voices echoing down the hallway until silence returned. The last greasy slice hit the trash, and the room deflated. For the first time in hours, the apartment was still. Alex stood at the sink, rinsing bottles, shoulders loose in a faded t-shirt. He was peeling a stubborn label from glass, head tilted down, hair falling into his eyes. The light above the counter hummed softly. Jake leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching. He was buzzing still, adrenaline not quite burned off from practice or gaming, and his gaze lingered longer than it should have. He noticed how Alex's hands moved with patience, fingers working the paper free as if the bottle mattered more than it did. The moment stretched. Quiet, almost too quiet. Then Jake's voice cut through. Careless, as always. But this time, there was something underneath. So, he said, scratching the back of his neck. What do guys even taste like? Alex froze. The bottle slipped slightly under the running water, half submerged, his grip tightening. For a second, he thought he had misheard. The words seemed too sharp, too pointed to belong in this kitchen, in this apartment, between two men who were supposed to be nothing more than roommates. He turned slowly, towel clenched in his hand. Jake stood there in the doorway, his expression open, almost childlike, like he didn't understand what he'd just unleashed. But maybe he did. The refrigerator hummed louder. The clock ticked in the corner like an intruder. The whole room seemed smaller, air pressing in around them. "You're asking the wrong guy," Alex said finally, his voice steady but soft. He tried to sound casual, like he was brushing off. But inside, his chest had tightened, heart hammering against ribs that suddenly felt too fragile. Jake grinned, not mocking, not cruel, just easy, unthinking, like it was just another joke tossed into the air. He laughed, shoved his hands into his shorts pockets, and wandered toward his room. Alex stayed by the sink, towel clenched harder than before, knuckles white. He told himself it was nothing. Just words. Just Jake being Jake, throwing questions into the world without caring where they landed. But it wasn't nothing. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and sharp. And Alex knew, even as he turned back to the sink, that they would not disappear. They would return. They would demand answers neither of them was ready to give. That night was ordinary in every other way. But those words, that question, split the air like glass cracking. It was the kind of moment that seemed small, almost forgettable, yet shifted something deep. A careless line that carried weight Jake might never admit, and Alex could never ignore. The days after that question stretched out like a thread pulled too tight, invisible to anyone else, but impossible for me to ignore. Life in the apartment went on as it always had. Classes, late practices, scattered meals at the kitchen table, the hum of music leaking through thin bedroom walls. Yet everything felt altered, as if a line had been crossed, though neither of us admitted it aloud. The words Jake had tossed so casually into the air, "What do guys even taste like?" echoed in my head with an insistence that mocked my attempts at composure. At first I tried to laugh it off internally, to file it away as nothing more than one of his reckless jokes, the kind he often blurted without thought. He was the type to tease about anything, to push buttons just to see how people reacted. But this was different. His voice that night had carried something I couldn't quite define, something I didn't want to define. And so I kept circling back to it, unable to escape. I began noticing things I had always ignored. The way his laughter filled the apartment, bouncing off walls as though it had nowhere else to go. The weight of his arm draped across the couch when we sat watching television, his hand brushing close enough to graze the cushion where mine rested. The sound of his footsteps pacing the hallway late at night, restless energy refusing to die down. None of it was new, but all of it seemed charged now, as if his question had switched on a light in a room I had pretended was dark. I caught myself watching him when I shouldn't. In the mornings, when he staggered out of his room, half asleep, hair a mess, eyes heavy with fatigue, but body already coiled with energy. At the court, where he moved with ease that made the game look effortless, sweat glistening, teammates slapping his back. Even in small moments, like when he leaned against the counter gulping water, throat working with each swallow. Ordinary details, magnified into something I couldn't shake. Jake seemed unchanged on the surface. He joked, as always, sprawled across the couch with his phone, trash-talked teammates through his headset, complained about professors who assigned papers longer than a few pages. But every so often, I'd catch his gaze lingering too long. His eyes would flick toward me in the middle of a conversation, quick but unmistakable, before darting away. Once or twice, I thought I saw hesitation in his grin, like he wanted to say something but swallowed it instead. The apartment grew smaller with each passing day. Shared routines became battlegrounds of silence. When our shoulders brushed in the hallway, I felt sparks that I tried to disguise as annoyance. When our laughter overlapped at some ridiculous video, the sound rang louder than it should have. Every small contact, every exchange carried weight. And underneath it all pulsed the memory of that single question, heavy as lead. I buried myself in my work, spreading sketches across the table as if lines and measurements could anchor me. I forced focus, dragging my pencil over the page until my hand cramped. Yet even then, distraction found me. His voice would filter in from the other room, easy and carefree, and my concentration would dissolve. I told myself it was just curiosity, a side effect of proximity, nothing more. But I knew I was lying. Jake, for his part, threw himself into basketball. He practiced harder, pushed longer, came home drenched in sweat, collapsing onto the couch with his chest heaving. He laughed louder around his teammates, as though volume could erase unease. Yet I noticed the small cracks in his act, the way his eyes flickered when our gazes locked, the way his sentences trailed off when conversation veered too close to anything personal. The tension thickened, invisible but constant, until it felt like another presence in the apartment. Even simple chores became moments of silent confrontation. Folding laundry side by side, I caught him staring before he jerked his eyes back to the shirt in his hands. Vacuuming the living room, he danced clumsily to music blaring from his phone, but his glances over his shoulder were not casual. I laughed despite myself, and he laughed back, and in that instant it was almost normal again. Almost. But normal had slipped through our fingers. Nights are the hardest. Rain tapping against the window, the glow of his lamp seeping through the crack under his door, the muted thump of a basketball against his palm when he couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing in. I thought about the way his question had hung in the kitchen air, careless yet cutting, and I replayed it until it became something else. Less a joke, more confession. Sometimes I wondered if he realized what he was doing to me. Whether the question had been tossed carelessly or whether it carried a weight he refused to admit. He was reckless, yes, but not cruel. Still, the effect was the same. My composure unraveling thread by thread, the distance between us shrinking even as we tried to keep it intact. I tried to convince myself that the tension was one-sided, that it existed only in my head. But then there were moments that betrayed him. His laugh faltered when our eyes met across the table. His hand twitched when it brushed mine, reaching for the remote. His words caught when the conversation turned too sharp. None of it was enough to prove anything. But it was enough to keep me restless, enough to remind me that silence would not protect us forever. It was a strange kind of torment, to want something you couldn't name, to feel its presence in every glance, every word, but to lack the courage to break the silence. The apartment had once been a refuge, a place where we could coexist without pretense. Now it felt like a pressure chamber, waiting for the smallest crack to unleash what we both were avoiding. Every day that passed, the air grew heavier. Every moment together became a test neither of us admitted we were taking. And still, beneath it all, the question lingered, like a match waiting for a spark. It had been building for days. Silence heavy enough to crack the walls, glances stretched too long, words swallowed before they could be spoken. I kept telling myself it would fade, that routine would smooth it over, that the question he had asked me weeks before would dissolve like all his other careless remarks. But routine didn't save us this time. It only made the wait worse. It turned every shared moment into an unspoken dare, every ordinary exchange into a standoff where neither of us wanted to admit we had already lost. One evening, the pressure broke. We were both in the living room, the television murmuring low with a game neither of us cared about. Jake sprawled across one end of the couch, legs stretched long, one arm draped lazily over the backrest. I sat on the other end, posture stiff, pretending to be interested in the screen while my thoughts tangled themselves into knots. The room felt too small, every sound amplified. The hiss of the soda when he cracked it open, the crunch when he bit into chips, the rhythm of his breathing that I could hear no matter how much I tried to ignore it. The silence between us had grown unbearable, and maybe he felt it too, because suddenly he spoke, his voice casual, almost playful. "You still never told me," he said. I looked at him, frowning. "Told you what?" His grin curved, but it was tight, as if it cost him something to hold it there. "You know what it's like? Guys." The words landed heavier this time. Not a joke tossed into the air, but a challenge, a provocation. My chest tightened. He was circling back to the same place, dragging us both towards something neither of us had admitted. I set my drink down carefully, fingers steady, even as my pulse wasn't. "You really want to know?" I asked quietly. He nodded, his eyes on me now, steady, unblinking. The air between us thickened, and for a moment, I thought maybe this was it, that the dam would finally break, that honesty would cut through the silence at last. I opened my mouth, ready to say something I hadn't even fully formed yet, something that would carry too much weight once spoken. But before I could, his expression shifted. His grin faltered, fear flickering across his face like a shadow. He straightened abruptly, as if the closeness of the moment had startled him more than the words themselves. "I'm not," he blurted, too fast, too sharp. He broke eye contact, turning away as though the sight of me had become unbearable. "I'm not like that." The words sliced through the room like a blade. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I felt as though the floor had given way beneath me. It wasn't just denial. It was rejection, flung into the space between us with the force of panic. He didn't say it calmly, didn't reason it out. He pushed it away like something dangerous, like something shameful. I sat back, forcing myself to stay composed even as my chest ached. He kept talking, tripping over his own words as though he could build a wall with them fast enough to keep the truth out. It was just curiosity. A stupid question, nothing more. I didn't mean anything by it. "You're reading too much into it." But his voice cracked on the last sentence, and that was what hurt the most. Because in that crack was the truth he couldn't bury, and he knew I had heard it. I wanted to shout at him. I wanted to demand why he had lit the fuse if he wasn't willing to face the fire. Instead, I stayed silent, my jaw locked, my hands clenched in a fist in my lap. He didn't notice, or maybe he did and chose not to look. Inside, anger and betrayal churned. Not because of girls, not because of jealousy, not because he had someone else. It was simpler and sharper than that. I felt betrayed because he had asked the question, pulled me to the edge, and then shoved me away as though I had imagined it all. He had denied not just me, but himself, and in doing so, left me carrying the weight of both truths alone. The room was thick with unease. He shifted on the couch, restless, his knee bouncing as though he wanted to run, but had nowhere to go. I stared at the television, but the screen blurred. Every second that passed widened the distance between us, even as we sat just feet apart. Finally, I spoke, my voice low, steady despite the storm inside. "You don't have to lie to me." He flinched as if I had struck him. "I'm not lying," he shot back too quickly. His eyes flicked toward me and then away, unable to hold the weight of mine. "I'm not gay." There was the phrase that always gets thrown like armor. Words meant to protect him, to shield him from a truth that scared him more than anything else. But the way he said them, the way his voice trembled around the edges, only deepened the cut. I turned to him fully now, my patience stripped raw. "You think saying it makes it true?" The question hung there, sharp and unyielding. He froze, shoulders tense, jaw tight, breathing uneven. For once, he had no comeback, no joke to defuse the moment. He just sat there, staring at the floor, trapped in a silence heavier than any argument. The betrayal burned deeper than I wanted to admit. He wasn't just rejecting me. He was rejecting himself, and in doing so, he was dragging me down with him. All I had ever wanted was honesty, but instead I was staring at someone who would rather hide behind denial than face what was right in front of him. The apartment, once our shared refuge, felt hostile now. The walls seemed to lean in, suffocating, as if they too had heard his words and decided to hold me accountable for them. I wanted to leave, to slam the door, to put distance between us before the hurt rooted itself too deeply. But I stayed seated, anchored by something I couldn't name, some stubborn piece of me that refused to abandon him, even as he pushed me away. He shifted again, finally dragging his hands through his hair with a frustrated groan. "Look, forget I said anything. Just forget it. It didn't mean anything." But it did. We both knew it did. And the fact that he wanted me to erase it, to pretend it never happened, cut deeper than the denial itself. I stood then, the weight of the moment pressing down so hard I couldn't stay still anymore. He looked up at me quickly, eyes wide with something between fear and regret. but I couldn't bring myself to meet his gaze. I walked toward my room without another word, the sound of my door closing louder than any shout could have been. Behind me, I heard nothing, no footsteps, no apologies, just silence. A silence that told me everything I needed to know. Lying in bed that night, I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying every second of the conversation. His voice, sharp and defensive. His eyes, darting like a trapped animal's. The way he had pushed me away, not with his hands, but with words that hurt more than any shove ever could. I realized then that betrayal doesn't always come from actions. Sometimes it comes from the refusal to acknowledge what's real. Sometimes the deepest cut is hearing someone deny the very thing you can both feel pulsing in the air between you. I wanted to tell myself that it didn't matter, that I could move past it, that this was just one more secret I would learn to bury. But the truth was undeniable. His denial had cracked something between us, something I wasn't sure could be repaired. And no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, I knew that nothing about our lives in that small apartment would ever be the same again. The first openness had come and gone, not with honesty, but with denial. And the wound it left behind was one we would both carry, whether we admitted it or not. The days after his denial stretched into a silence so thick it felt alive, pulsing through the walls of the apartment, filling the air between us like smoke. Nothing was said, but everything was different. It was as if we had both stepped across a line that night on the couch, and instead of acknowledging it, he had slammed a door in my face and bolted it shut. Yet even locked doors cannot mute what is already loose in the air. Jake tried to act as though nothing had happened. He woke up early for practice, his sneakers squeaking down the hallway as he left before sunrise. He came back sweaty, exhausted, collapsing onto the couch with his phone in hand, scrolling through endless feeds and laughing too loudly at things that weren't funny. He filled the silence with noise. Music turned up too high. Video games played deep into the night. Phone calls with teammates that dragged on long after the conversation had run out of meaning. He kept talking, laughing, living as though he hadn't said those words, "I'm not like that." But he wasn't convincing anyone. Not me, and not himself. I saw in the way his eyes darted when I walked into the room, the way he avoided my gaze as though it burnt. I heard it in the stutter of his jokes, the half-second pauses when he was about to say something and thought better of it. He was fighting with himself. Every gesture a confession he refused to voice. For me, the silence was unbearable. I had always believed I could endure anything with enough discipline. I had learned to control my emotions, to order my world into neat stacks like the sketchbooks on my desk, each one aligned with the edge of the table. But his denial had torn a jagged hole through that order, and no amount of sketches or calculations could patch it. We ate meals together like strangers. The scrape of forks against plates was louder than our words. His laughter, once easy and infectious, had become strained, forced out like a performance for an audience that no longer clapped. At night, I lay awake listening to the sound of him pacing his room, the thump of a basketball against his palm, as though repetition could drown the thoughts he didn't want to admit. The wall between us wasn't built overnight, but each brick was laid with precision. One careless laugh, one averted glance, one denial stacked on top of another. By the end of the week, it towered between us, solid and suffocating. I told myself I could live with it, that I could swallow the hurt, bury it deep, and let the silence rot there instead of tearing us apart. But I was lying, and I knew it. Every time I saw him laughing with someone else, every time I caught him staring at me, before quickly turning away, the wound deepened. He wasn't just denying me. He was denying himself and forcing me to carry the weight of it with him. The breaking point came one evening when the rain had been falling all day, tapping against the single window in the living room like a warning that could not be ignored. Jake came home late from practice, shoulders tense, the hood of his sweatshirt pulled up as if he could hide inside it. He tossed his bag carelessly into the corner, muttered something I didn't catch, and dropped onto the couch. I was at the table, papers spread before me, though I hadn't been working for hours. My pencil lay unused, the lines I had drawn blurring into meaningless scratches. The air between us was heavy, the silence a pressure in my chest. I looked at him, slouched there with his head tilted back, eyes closed, as though exhaustion could excuse the distance. Something in me snapped. You think this is working? I asked. His eyes opened slowly, confusion flashing for a moment before giving way to something harder. What are you talking about? This act, I said, pushing the papers aside with more force than I intended. Pretending nothing happened. Pretending you didn't ask me that question. Pretending you didn't spend days looking at me like I stopped, biting off the rest, but it was too late. The words hung in the air, raw and undeniable. He sat up straighter, his jaw tightening. I told you, I'm not. You're not what? I cut him off, my voice sharper than I'd ever allowed it to be. You're not interested? You're not curious? You're not afraid? His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked like a man cornered, like someone trapped between the truth and the version of himself he thought the world demanded. His hands curled into fists against his knees, knuckles white. You don't get it, he said finally, voice low, almost broken. Then explain it to me, I demanded, leaning forward, refusing to let him slip away again. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're not afraid of me at all. You're afraid of yourself. The words cracked through the room like thunder. His head jerked up, eyes locking on mine, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't look away. His chest rose and fell in sharp bursts, as though each breath cost him. Anger flickered across his face, but beneath it, I saw fear. Not of me, not of what I might say or do, but of the reflection staring back at him from inside his own head. He wanted to argue. I could see it. His lips parted, his jaw flexed, but the words wouldn't come. He had built his wall too high, too fast, and now it was crumbling under the weight of his own silence. You think I don't notice? I continued, my voice steady even as my heart pounded. The way you look at me, the way you freeze when we're too close, the way your words trip over themselves every time you try to laugh it off. You're not fooling anyone. Not me. Not yourself. His fist tightened, his shoulders stiff. Stop, he said, the word strained, almost a plea. But I didn't stop. You can keep pretending all you want, Jake, but you're not afraid of me. You're afraid of what admitting the truth would mean for you. Afraid of what people will say, what your team will think, what your parents will believe. That's the fight you're running from, not me. The silence that followed was deafening. He sat there, trembling with tension, his eyes locked on mine with a mixture of fury and desperation. He wanted to deny it, to shout me down, to bury the truth once more. But he couldn't, because for the first time, I had spoken the words he had spent every waking moment trying not to say. The wall between us didn't fall that night, but a crack ran through it. A fracture too deep to ignore. He stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal, running a hand through his hair as if he could rip the thoughts from his skull. I sat there at the table, my own hands steady despite the storm inside me. Finally, he stopped, back turned to me, shoulders rigid. His voice came out low, raw, each word forced through clenched teeth. You think it's that easy? You think you can just say it out loud, and suddenly it's fine? You have no idea what this would cost me. I stared at his back, at the tension carved into his muscles, and felt the truth of it. He was terrified. Not of me, not of whatever this was between us, but of the world outside our door. A world that had always been ready to tell him who he was allowed to be. You're right, I said quietly. I don't know what it would cost you, but I know what it's costing you now. And I know what it's costing me. He turned then, eyes blazing, and for a moment, I thought he would finally break, finally let the truth spill out. But instead, he clenched his jaw, muttered something I couldn't hear, and stormed down the hallway. His door slammed shut, rattling the thin walls. I sat there long after the echoes faded, staring at the empty space he had left behind. The storm outside raged on, rain slamming against the glass, wind howling through the cracks. Inside, the silence returned, heavier than before. The conflict was no longer hidden. It was out in the open now, raw and undeniable. The wall between us was cracked, but neither of us knew whether it would crumble or stand taller than ever. All I knew was that nothing could ever go back to the way it was. The apartment felt different after that night. It was not louder or quieter, not bigger or smaller. It was simply heavier, as though every wall had soaked in the words we had thrown at each other, and now carried them like echoes that refused to fade. We moved through the space cautiously, like men walking across thin ice, aware that the wrong step could break everything beneath us. Jake tried, for a while, to bury it again. He threw himself harder into practice, came home drenched and too exhausted to speak, left early in the mornings before I was awake. He laughed with his teammates in the courtyard, his voice loud and reckless, but when his eyes drifted toward me, I saw the hesitation there, the fracture he couldn't disguise. His denial still clung to him, but it no longer fit. He wore like a shirt 2 sizes too small, seemed straining, fabric stretched to breaking. I kept myself busy with work, sketching until the lines blurred on the page, building models until my fingers ached from cutting cardboard. But the truth was that none of it distracted me. Every line I drew bent toward him. Every wall I designed reminded me of the one between us. I told myself patience would fix it, that if I waited long enough, he would come to terms with what he was running from. But patience has limits, and mine was running thin. It happened late one evening. The city outside was buzzing, students drifting between parties, laughter spilling into the streets. But our apartment was quiet, only the glow of my desk lamp cutting through the shadows. I sat at my table, pencil idle in my hand, when I heard his footsteps. Slow, hesitant, not the careless stride he usually carried. He stopped at the doorway, and when I looked up, I saw him standing there with his shoulders hunched, eyes restless, mouth pressed into a hard line. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, thick and uneasy. Then he stepped forward, crossing the room as though each movement was a decision he had to wrestle into being. He leaned against the edge of the table, staring at the mess of sketches scattered across it. "You were right," he said finally, voice low, rough. I didn't answer at first. I wanted him to say it again, wanted to be sure I hadn't imagined it. He exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his hair. "That night, when you said I'm afraid of myself, you were right." The words fell heavy between us, but this time he didn't try to take them back. His shoulders sagged as though he had been carrying them for too long. I set my pencil down, studying him. His face was raw, stripped of bravado, the grin he always hid behind nowhere to be found. "I don't know what this makes me," he continued, eyes flicking up to mine before darting away. "I don't even know what to call it. All I know is I can't stop thinking about it, about what I said, about what it meant, about you." There was laid bare at last. Not polished, not certain, not even complete, but real. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not pain this time, but something sharper, cleaner. He wasn't offering a solution or a promise. He was offering truth, and it was more than I had ever expected to hear. "I can't tell the world," he said, shaking his head, frustration carving lines into his brow. "Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. My team, my parents, everyone, they'd never let me forget it. But I can tell you, at least you. I can be honest with you." For a moment, I didn't move. I want to hold on to the weight of his words, to let them settle fully before I spoke. He shifted uncomfortably under my silence, hands braced against the table, jaw tight as though bracing for rejection. "You think I need you to announce it to the world?" I said finally, my voice steady. "I don't. I just need you to stop lying to yourself." To me. He looked up then, and for the first time in weeks, his eyes didn't dart away. They stayed locked on mine, unflinching, filled with something I hadn't seen before. Not certainty, but the courage to stop running. "I don't want to lie anymore," he admitted quietly. The tension in the room shifted. It wasn't gone, not by any stretch, but it softened, reshaped itself into something fragile, something possible. The wall between us was still there, but now it had a door, cracked open by his words. We stayed there for a long time, neither of us speaking. He leaned against the table, I sat in my chair, and the silence wasn't suffocating this time. It was tentative, waiting, fragile as glass, but alive. He finally broke it, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "I don't know what happens next." "Neither do I admitted. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe it doesn't have to be figured out tonight." He nodded, a small, uncertain motion, but it carried more weight than any speech could. For the first time, he wasn't pretending. For the first time, he had allowed himself to admit that the world he had built around himself wasn't as solid as he wanted it to be. We didn't celebrate. There was no dramatic gesture, no sudden transformation. But there was honesty, and honesty was enough to begin with. The days that followed weren't perfect. He still avoided certain conversations, still laughed too loudly around his teammates, still carried himself with that restless energy of someone trying to keep two lives balanced. But there was a difference now. When we were alone, the silence didn't crush us. His glances no longer darted away as quickly. Sometimes he even held them, letting them linger long enough to feel like an answer. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't the kind of ending you read in stories, where love conquers all and the world applauds. It was messy and uncertain and fragile. But it was real, and that was enough. One evening, we found ourselves back on the couch, the same place where it had all started. The television played quietly, forgotten in the background. He sat on one end, I on the other, a cushion of space between us. But the air felt different now. Not empty, not suffocating, simply open. He turned to me suddenly, his voice low but steady. I don't know if I can ever make this easy, but I don't want to lose it either. I don't want to lose you. For a long time, I didn't answer. I let the words settle, felt them thread through the cracks that had once split us apart. Then I nodded, simple but certain. Then don't. The simplicity of it seemed to hit him harder than any declaration could. He exhaled, shoulders loosening, as though he had been waiting to hear those two words all along. The apartment remained the same, 2 bedrooms, 1 couch, a kitchen table that still wobbled when leaned on. But inside it, something had shifted. No, not shifted, grown. The weight was still there, the fear of what lay beyond our walls. But alongside, it was a truth that couldn't be denied anymore. We didn't have the answers. We didn't have the perfect ending. But we had a chance. A chance at something honest, something unpolished but strong enough to hold. And that chance, for the first time since this began, felt like hope.